our local history. When we last met back in October, we presented the history of the Peñas and the Vacas, part 1. And in October, we talked about the local history from prehistory up to about 1841. And then we examined the California indigenous people, and we focused on the Patwin for the local. Today, for part 2, we want to continue with our history of the Peñas and the Vacas, but it's more of an abbreviated California timeline. So it's from like 1690s to the 1960s, the 1860s. So that period of time is what we're going to talk about today. So what we want to know is, who were these people who came to settle here in California in what we call the northern frontier? You know, when and where did they come from? And then we also want to finish up with the talk about the Patwins, and specifically we want to update you on San Nieto, which we know him as Chief Solano. Part 3, a closer look at the Vacas and the Peñas from 1841 until present day. That will be presented in April, on Sunday, April 16th. But for today, we will begin our talk with Armando Perez. He is of Apache descent, and he is a Peña-Adobe Historical Society board member and docent. And he will begin our presentation with a Native American blessing. Then he will be followed by Cecilia Peña, who's on our Zoom. And she is our 5th generation Peña, and she is also a board member and docent. Cecilia will trace the California settlements over the time to help us understand who was living here in our area in Northern California when the Vacas and the Peñas arrived back in 1841, after they migrated all the way out here from the New Mexico territory. And then Armando will conclude our talk today with an update on the ending saga of Chief Solano, friend and ally of General Vallejo, who, with Vallejo, played a very important role in the development of the Northern California as we know it today. So, Armando?
Just a small blessing for all of us. I'll get this started. Usually this would be lit up with smoke with the sage, but I don't want to start any fire alarms. Oh, great Creator, hear me. We pray for Mother Earth. We pray to thank you for the beautiful people on this earth. And bless those people who have departed from us, especially that gentleman that filmed last time. We pray for those who have not been born, to find good air to breathe, water that is safe to drink. We must keep Mother Earth well. Great Creator, I hear you in the winds. I feel you in the waters. I feel you in this earth. I hear you saying, God bless my children. God bless you.
Hello, welcome. Thank you, Dixon Historical Society, for having us back again. The mission of the Peña-Adobe Historical Society is to preserve the history of the Peña-Adobe and provide educational and cultural services to the community. As Cricket already said, that last year we presented the indigenous history of the Southwest, and particularly in California, and specifically the Patwin. Today, again, probably for the first time, we will focus on the settlement history of the soldiers, traders, and colonist settlers who came to California to live. So this is where we left off last time with this particular slide, and I want to know, I wanted to start out though in a different place. So I'm not quite ready to talk about the family's history here. Here though are the youngest members of our family. This is little, I'm going a little crazy here with my nervousness here, but this is Nestora, who's in the foreground in this picture. This is Nestora, and this is Peña-Vaca, and they're riding on the mule, ready to go to their new home in California, looking back at the Cerro Pedernal, perhaps for the last time. But I'm not ready to tell this story yet. I am one of 300 to 500,000 individuals who have ancestry descended from the Spanish and Mexican eras of California. That's an amazing number to me when I first heard it. My great-great-grandparents, Juan Felipe and Isabel Peña, and their family came to the Laguna Valley in 1841 with Juan Manuel Vaca, a widower, and his children on the old Spanish Trail from New Mexico territory near Santa Fe. My earliest California ancestor, though, on my dad's side, was a third great-grandmother born in 1793. That's 230 years ago at the San Gabriel Mission in California. I've enjoyed the luxury of having my pedigree handed to me by our family genealogist, and have had the great fortune of having the Peña Adobe Historical Society and Vacaville Heritage Council at my side, plying me with information, research opportunities, and obviously technical support, since they're there today. My background is primarily in business. I'm a self-taught family researcher who has inherited the gift of gab from my ancestors. I'm not an expert. But I've heard so many inaccurate narratives about California history and feel the need and responsibility to speak out and address them. As a child, I was told that my dad's family was pure Spanish and that a nice General Vallejo gave us land. In my fourth grade California history class, we learned about the missions. And then there was some stuff about the indigenous people a little bit, and maybe there were courses or something like that. And then somehow we skipped to the gold rush. But there was always the TV program Zorro that helped. Do you know that many fellow Californians walk into the adobe who do not know the basic fact that this was Mexico? So I decided that I would revisit the state's history to discover the complete story for myself and be able to share it with others, as I'm doing today. The first thing I did was I made a timeline. I didn't want to focus on the events of the day in the timeline, except when they illuminated who was settling California and when. I invite you to come along with me with this perspective. I sent you a couple of handouts, or you'll receive them today, or if you just joined today, you can find them here in the chat section. There's also some links that I've given you. Please look, if you have it, handout number 1. This is an abbreviated timeline for California from 1690s. Now, that's not the beginning of Spanish rule at all. It's the date I picked because it was the beginning of the exploration of Baja California. I'm offering the handout as a reference. I'm not going to cover everything on this timeline, certainly. But in looking at the timeline during the Spanish rule now, notice first that all of the settlements were on the coast. Interesting. Also notice that they didn't settle in an orderly way. It wasn't like from south to north that they, trudged up California, creating each mission and Presidio as they went. It wasn't like that. They kind of skipped around a lot. San Francisco Presidio, for instance, and the mission existed a decade before Santa Barbara. So on to some time travel, and let's explore these subjects together. Somewhat before my timeline, the Viceroyalty of New Spain began in 1521. And you remember, we discussed this in the last meeting, if you were here, that California was first believed to be an island. Here it is right here. And the explorers named it Califia after a mythical Black queen. Map makers used California to label unexplored territory on the West Coast. This 1562 map by Spanish Diego Gutierrez used the name California for the first time. As it shows here, the first exploration of the California coast was sailing expedition leader Juan Cabrillo. And he got all the way to San Miguel Island, which is Santa Barbara. And then there was Sir Francis Drake, who got all the way up to Point Reyes, Drake's Bay, and Sebastian Vizcaíno, who got to Monterey. By the late 1760s, the Spanish king and a handful of other European rulers began to realize how important North America's Pacific coast would have in maritime trade. The Russians had been advancing south from their strongholds in present-day Alaska. The British had been pushing west in Canada and were approaching the Pacific coast. In order to secure Spain's claims in California, the King of Spain wanted to explore and also settle the coastline so that he could create a buffer zone to protect Spain's territories from the threat of an invasion. Let's consider these two important expeditions. First was de Portola. His expedition led to the founding of Alta California and contributed to the solidification of Spanish territorial claims in the disputed and unexplored territory. His route followed fairly close to what became the El Camino Real and Highway 101, at least to Monterey. His party included the first Europeans to report on seeing San Francisco Bay, although they did not name it. The explorers brought Father Serra and 200 of the Spanish Longhorn cattle to supply the California missions with food, hides, and tallow. They also brought mules and horses. De Anza, born in Mexico, completed the opening of an overland route from Sonora, Mexico to the California coast. And this is his route here. As he went to Arizona, he went all the way up here. He did this twice. The first time he just brought the military, the soldiers, but the second time he actually brought people, the largest party actually of people that came to California, certainly at this point in that north in the state. You see, when Spain sent soldiers, it was not just to operate the military bases or the presidios. De Anza founded both San Diego and San Francisco. Spain also wanted to create communities, especially farming communities that could provide food for those bases and also grow the Spanish population in the territory. Amongst them, neighbor alert, and family, the future patriarchs of the Berryessa family were among the settlers, as were, you can see by this list here, Peralta, Pacheco, Pico, Moraga, Berryessa. Notice that they were all from Mexico or Arizona, which was Mexico, or well, no, excuse me, it was Spain here. So, but these were people came with them. You'll recognize those names, and Berryessa became part of our family. We'll talk about that more later. In 1777, fairly early, look how far up the coast they'd come. Originally, by the way, Berryessa, who came to San Francisco, became a soldier and was eventually transferred to the mission in Santa Clara. This is where his children and grandchildren learned their ranching skills. I was surprised to see that San Jose was the first pueblo. It became the capital of Mexico's unorganized territory in 1849. And then it was the first capital of California in 1850 to 1852. And I wanted to mention, since we're nearing the end by 1817 of Spain's rule, was Mission San Rafael. In San Rafael, this was the last mission built under Spanish rule, but it was only the 20th mission. Now, this mission was an I can't say the word. It was Asistencia of Mission San Francisco de Assisi. Was a hospital to treat sick Native Americans. It was Alta California's first sanatorium. So here we have Fort Ross. You've heard about Fort Ross. This was the big threat from Russia for us. And it was the hub of the southernmost Russian settlements. This was a place that was worth settling because it was the first multi-ethnic community in Northern California, with a combination, as I say here, of Native Californians, Native Alaskans, and Russians. And they all actually worked together. It was an interesting situation. But Spain was very threatened by Russia, and it was not that far away from on the coast from San Francisco and San Rafael. As an aside, you might know the name John Sutter. He bought Fort Ross, unbelievably, in 1841 with an unsecured note for $30,000, which he never paid. He cannibalized it. He took everything from the fort to provide supplies for his colony in the Sacramento Valley, where 7 years later, you know what happens. So let's get into the Alta California land grants during Spanish rule. So a couple of things that I want to point out here. Now, you received a link by email or found it in your chat of a Wikipedia list of California's ranchos. It works like an Excel sheet so that you can sort it by date, by name of rancho, etc. So you can actually look at just those land grants that were done during Spanish times. Let me point out some things here. Interestingly enough, during Spanish rule, no private land ownership was allowed. The king was the only one allowed to own land. The grants were similar to free leases. Land was measured in leagues, a square league equivalent to about 4,439 acres. We're just going to look at a few here. The first was in 1784, which is the first of any of the land grants. There were 3 of them right in a row. The first was in 1784, the Rancho San Pedro. Now this paper behind my writing here is the diseño, the hand-drawn map of that rancho. And this was in Los Angeles. The biggest was also in 1784. Los Nietos was granted to Manuel Nieto, and he had 160,000 acres in Los Angeles. This was by far the biggest rancho, I think, in either time, both Spanish and Mexican rule. The most northern in Spain was in 1820, the San Antonio was granted to Luis Maria Peralta. Now you might recognize that name. He's the guy that came with Dianza, right? He was also the father of Berryessa's future wife. So this was in Oakland. This is as far north as the Spanish land grants happened. At the end of Spain's rule, there were 4 presidios, 3 pueblos, 20 missions, and 30 land grants. The most northern presidio was San Francisco. The most northern pueblo was San Jose. And there were only 3 pueblos. The other 2, one was in Los Angeles and the other one was in Santa Cruz, of all places. The most northern mission was San Rafael, as we mentioned. And the most northern land grant was again Peralta's in Oakland. Mexico wins independence in 1821. You know, it's really interesting. It occurred to me recently that the entire period of Mexican rule, which was 1821 to 1848, was renamed the Rancho era. This was Mexico during this time. The Mexican citizens, of course, were called Californios or Californianos. It's kind of no wonder then that the people coming into the adobe didn't know it was Mexico. It's like, when did they start calling it the Rancho era? I don't remember that as a child, maybe you do, but it's interesting how those two things, nothing mentions Mexico. So here we are, the mission period lasted only 60 years. It seems like it was longer, but it was only 60 years. And the mission San Francisco Solano was the 21st, the last and the northernmost mission in a string of 21 missions, starting in San Diego in 1769. It was the only mission to be built under Mexican rule. In 1834, the secularization of the missions allowed the creation of large land grants as Americans and European settlers increasingly migrated to Mexican California. Vallejo, transferred from San Francisco, oversaw the secularization of San Francisco Solano. This meant turning the mission into a regular parish church and dividing properties with the now baptized natives, which didn't happen, basically. In 1835, he became the director of colonization and the only person empowered to grant land in the northern frontier. Mission land, again, was not for sale. Instead, fearing foreign encroachment and continued indigenous issues, General Vallejo, according to a 1953 textbook, he put out the word, "Come to Sonoma, there is free land for the asking. We'll help you clear the land. We will help you to build your home. Tools will be given for planting. The storerooms of the missions are full of grain and seed. Come get your land." So I was raised with this partial truth. Yes, Vallejo did give us land, and he did give us, well, sort of his land because it was in his charge, but it was native land that he gave us. I didn't realize this until really just a few years ago, that we had been told that, and that that's really what happened. For the most part, Spanish California had developed in relative isolation. It was really far away from everything, except for the appointed officials from the central government. When Mexico won its independence from Spain in 1821, government control was even further diminished in California, as they also opened up trade between California and other countries, especially the United States. The colonization law in 1824 had allowed foreigners to immigrate to the country. In the early 1820s, Anglo-Americans developed an intensive trade with California via sailing ships around Cape Horn. Trade with the United States began the process of economic detachment of California and New Mexico from central Mexico. Ships brought hides and tallow from California in exchange for manufactured goods from both the United States and England. Increased trade led to increased demand for consumer goods and therefore greater dependence on the United States as the primary source of supply. The old Spanish Trail, shown up here, was cobbled together from indigenous trails. It was established in 1829. It linked Los Angeles and Santa Fe, New Mexico, becoming the first major northern Mexican interprovincial trade route. It brought blankets and other woven goods to California, which lacked sheep, and bartered them for horses and mules that were scarce in New Mexico. So here you get to meet my family for real this time. During this period, our northern frontier began to draw people, including us. Now, family and neighbor alert, Armando Armijo, our matriarch, Isabel Peña, here's Isabel Peña right up here. It was her cousin who founded the first route of the old Spanish Trail, called the Armijo route. And this is the trail, the lower one that you can see here, the most south. The Armijos were granted land just south of us called Rancho Telenos. Now, they would be in about Fairfield. So that's another neighbor. In 1830, William Wolfskill, our northern neighbor, John Wolfskill's brother, and by the way, we have a William Wolfskill descendant here. Conchita is here, and she's a descendant of William. And he and a group of other traders followed a less arid and less dangerous route and created the main branch. This is the branch our families took. So that's this middle route right here. That's the main branch. In 1839, Juan Manuel Vaca, who's up here, I don't know if the video people are showing up here, but this is Juan Manuel Vaca up here. He was known with the B as in boy spelling of his name in other places other than in Vacaville. We'll talk about that next time. And he chose the valley, the Laguna Valley, as our future home when he was here in 1839. So their migration to California was not something that came about overnight. This was a planned event, since they didn't come until 1841. And the group that they came with, which was with the Roland Workman expedition, was the first group that traveled this trail that came with people who were actually going to live in California and not just do trade there. So just a quick introduction of the family. This is Isabel. We called her Isabel, and here's Juan Felipe, and all of her children, the 5 boys and the 1 girl, are who traveled on the trail. So they all came from New Mexico territory. Both of the parents were born during Spain's rule in 1798, and they came in 1841, which was now Mexican rule. This girl here, the youngest child and the only daughter, was the child that's pictured on the mule in that photo that I showed at the beginning of the talk. The day before we came, the Bartleson Bidwell party came. And there were other people that took other trails. People were starting to come to California. Before Bidwell, by the way, who was our neighbor, by the way, only 100 Anglos lived in California. 100, okay? Okay, so this is my first conclusion. Where and when did people settle California? In 1843, the partners, Peña-Vaca, they received their government gift of a 10-league land grant. They had a corrected grant in 1845, but basically this is the decennial upon which they received the land grant. Unlike under Spanish rules, grantees would receive legal title to their land, but under Mexican rule, those grants, remember, that were made under Spanish rule, they were now became land grants automatically. So everybody was now under Mexican rule. Everybody had property rights. It was no longer owned by anybody other than the people. As part of the petition process, the ranch included this decennial, and you can see that it's very roughly drawn. Which with very vaguely defined boundary lines. You can see here we have that they have this great big rectangle, which would have been twice the size of our land grant. It would have been like 20 square acres rather than the 10. So we have over here the mountains of Napa, Sacramento River. There's Los Huetos. This was the became later called Putos, and then Puto Creek. And then we have the plains, that's the Llano, and we have the Loma, the hills, the Sierra Mountains they have in here. So this was this gigantic area that they claimed. And you'll see that here, and this is the way they lived for a period of time until later when the survey happened during United States rule. This was a map I found. I thought this was really fascinating, where it shows you the Pueblo land is the really light colored land in here. The Mexican land grants that were early from 1822 to 1834. And I'm assuming those were the shepherded in land grants from Spain and all that. And then this kind of a middle gray color are all the ones that happened from 1835 to 1846. That's really late. So all of these interior land grants were after 1835. It shows you how much they concentrated on settling the coast of California and not the interior, at least at this point. And let's see, I wanted to give you some of the conditions that they needed to meet in order to get their land grants. You needed to be native born or a naturalized citizen or be married to a Mexican. The coastal lands were only given to Mexican citizens. You couldn't get it if you were American or whatever. You had to belong to the Catholic Church. You had to build a house within a year. All roads and trails needed to remain clear. You had to stock the land with at least 100 cattle, and you couldn't transfer land to the church or it would revert back to the government. In Spanish and Mexican California, and this is really important, women had the right to acquire property. Women could also administer, protect, and invest their property. Of over 500 land grants made in Mexican California, approximately 27 were made to women. So this is generally now where do people live. We have this visual, you can't tell with these kind of a blobs where our land grant is in all of this because it's just blobs, but it's a kind of a nice visual. Okay, so this is part 2 of my conclusion. Who was here then? So there was family and other New Mexicans like the Armijos who lived in Fairfield. There was the indigenous crew that came up with us on our way up to get our land. This indigenous crew from Mission Santa Barbara came with us. It was a 30-person crew. They came up to build the houses. There were friends and political allies like the Vallejos. There were the Californianos. They were mostly ethnically blended people, any combination of Spanish, African, indigenous descent, born in California or who came here during Spanish or Mexican rule. The gente de razón, for example, the Berrieses. The Berrieses were also not only our neighbors, there was one of the group that lived not too far away, what the area called Lake Berryessa, which is no longer there. And you'll see when we look at some other maps that the Berryesses were elsewhere as well. Now, I was talking to some cousins about this whole Californianos business. There are some people that think the Californianos were the people that were born here, and then the other people were called Californianos, but it's pretty much, you can use either term, people will know what you mean. The more we think about it though, we really think that our family never stopped calling themselves New Mexicans. I don't think they ever called themselves a Californiano, but I could be wrong about that, but that's just what some of us family think. The other people that came here were the Anglo-Americans, who married California women, who became Mexican citizens. They spoke Spanish, they converted to Catholicism and were considered Californios or Californianos. For instance, the Wolfskills. There were the Anglo-Americans or Europeans primarily who brought their families and kept their own culture, like the Bidwells. There was likely at least one ranchera, a small indigenous settlement that housed the rancho workers that would have been close by. There were probably indigenous, depending upon the time of year that came, there were indigenous vaqueros, and they had seasonal camps. There were Christianized indigenous servants or slaves who lived with rancheros. For instance, in our own family, we had 2 women that lived with us called the 2 Marys. You'll find out about them later. This is early though, and I really don't think they were around this early, but there were probably these servants in other households in the area that perhaps were more set up. There were the Sonoma Mission, the soldiers, priests, officials, the Christianized indigenous people. Were there free indigenous people? I really doubt it. I don't know. Were there crypto Jews? Well, the crypto Jews really have a thing about being known. They don't want you to know that they're there. So I don't know about them. And the Sephardic Jews, there was a very large group of Sephardic Jews that did come in during the gold rush. Now, some interesting, one thing I want to mention before we go on is that some colonists arrived with or attained upper class status mainly through ranching or the acquisition of land grants. Some became identified as pure-blooded Spaniards, such as my own family. That we are mixed is verifiable by our family's DNA, including my own. I am not pure Spanish. Okay. And this is what this group of people did together. There were now 10 to 15,000 indigenous people here. By 1845, the ranching economy predominated. And according to a Berryessa descendant who wrote a book, the cattle barons of what are now Solano, Napa, and Yolo counties were the Vacas, the Peñas, the Armijos, and the Berryessas. Peña alone owned 2,000 cattle and 200 to 300 horses. His stock was worth $15,000. Okay, this is a lot. The events of the day. I'm not going to go through all of this here. I wanted to show you though what those people that I said were living here, these are the lives that they were leading. What I want to, what really jumps out here are the reasons for the end of the cattle boom. The drought, and the drought was severe. And these are things that, besides the gold rush, which was this huge thing, of course, that changed everything in terms of how many people were here, what was going to happen next. There were all these other factors too. It wasn't just the gold rush. Although they helped a great deal. The squatters, there were the squatters. We all know about the squatters. And there were floods. There were floods in the 50s. There were floods in the 60s. And the hydraulic mining actually extended the floods. That flood that I right here, 1850 to 1853, the last couple of years were the floods caused by the mining. And of course, the Land Commission Act, which we'll talk about next, was kind of the crowning blow to the whole thing. But you have states being formed, right? The state of California, now we're the United States. You have cities being formed. And those didn't happen until after when the state of California happened. There was the township of Vacaville, and a little nod to Dixon here. Their first city was called Sylvieville, and it was founded in 1852. We got our patent in 1857, but this era was over at the end of 62. And I'm ending the timeline here because it's a good place to stop, and it leads me to my final conclusion. Who specifically lived here and when? Okay, this I had so much fun doing this map, so I hope you enjoy it too. This shows you here our decennial, right? So we went from this, and this was the surveyed land grant. Notice our borders now. Look what happened to this great big rectangle, which would have been, you know, like this whole thing here was now this sort of jerry-rigged configuration that followed the water and all the fertile land that they could fit into that 10 square leagues of land. You can see in this map, here's Sylvieville down here, and Dixon to be, it hadn't occurred yet. So this must have been a later map that this decennial was placed on, so you could see the reference of it. Over here, let's take a look. Let's take a look at this map. Now I've given you a link to this 1862 survey map of California. Its digital form is interactive, so you can zoom in and look at the details. Like this Northern California map I've created is a detail of this map right here. And like I said, I've sent you the digital version of this. And it also shows the key here. This is the name of the rancho and a number assigned to it. As you can see, these land grants have numbers assigned to them. You can obviously very clearly see the Peña-Vaca land grant right here. Our patented map was in 1958, and it's number 41 on this key list. What I did was I tried to reconcile this 1862 map with a list of ranches. There's about 10 I couldn't find, partly due, I think, to the worn map. You can see here, I couldn't see some of the numbers, but it's fine. It shows what I really wanted to see, which is where we were. The list gives you the original grant date, though, and this is what's important. So it doesn't give the patented land grant of 1858. It's giving us on the list of ranchos, the Wikipedia list, the original land grant date. Since you can figure that the rancheros had to have been living there for at least a year or two, to get it together with the house and building the house and getting all that stuff together. This, my friends, shows us really, even though it's an 1862 map, it actually shows us who was living here when the Peñas came, because you can tell by the date that's on their original land grant, or is at least as close as you can get to telling who was there. And you can see specifically, because if you use my link to the digital form of the rancho list, you can actually find out the history of each rancho by clicking on the ranch name. So it will give you way more information than you ever thought you wanted to know. And let's look a little bit at this this map before we go on. So what's interesting, you can see the big valley here, the Sacramento Valley, and how there's nothing there. This was a lake bed geographically at some point. All of this shaded part right here, these are the Tule marshes. So you can see we're kind of tucked in here, hugging the valley, with a wonderful shot towards Sacramento here for future reference. And then we can see that some of our friends that we've talked about, some of our neighbors that I've talked about, can be seen here too. Here's the Wolfskill Ranch right here. Here is the Armijo Ranch hugging the Sassoon Ranch. The Sassoon Ranch was Chief Solano's ranch, given to him by Vallejo. And this is some Vallejo property. He has more, but I can't really see what, because it's over here somewhere. This blue right here are all the Berryessas. Look at that. This is the Berryessa number 43, the one that is Berryessa Lake now, Lake Berryessa, I guess. And we had 5 marriages the Peñas did with these Berryessas in 2 generations, 2 of their generations and 2 of our generations. So that's kind of interesting. And look also too how the Berryessas are like strung across this part of the state. And they have a very interesting story with lots of tales and drama and everything like that. And I'm beginning to wonder if they weren't maybe California's Border Patrol, because they were involved in a lot more interesting things than we were. We were kind of protected in a way, it looks like to me almost. And if you knew my family and knew their lives, you had to wonder whether was it that they were just sheltered and nothing bad ever happened. I mean, there was the normal, life and death as normal in people's lives, but there wasn't like real extreme stories. Or is it because nobody wanted to talk about that stuff? It could have been the latter. My family was very close-minded. So this will give you, if you want to play with this and do research on your own, this will give you a good idea of who your neighbors were. So you can find yourself on the map and you can find out who was living there back in the day. And this, is just a moment of time that we were able to capture because of the dynamics of this map. We're really looking at here 1943. And if you take a look at the list, even the PDF that I've sent you, you can see that the earliest was a fellow, John Cooper, who got his land grant in 1833. That's super early. So that's interesting. But you know what? He was a Vallejo relative. So he was likely in that category of one of those people that came in and married a Mexican. This was one of the guys. The last one was Francisco Berryessa, who got his in 1846. There's a couple other ones to note, which was a couple other early ones. I looked to see there was an 1837 one. That was another Vallejo relative. There was 1836 was Nicolas Higuera, who is 67, wherever that is, 67 around here somewhere. Anyway, he is connected to the Berryessas, so he's related to the Berryessas. Every one of these ranchos is really fascinating. I found out so much more information than I thought I ever even wanted to know. And here down here, remember Bidwell? Here's Bidwell down here. So, and all of, I mentioned that all of the townships, all of that happened afterwards. Sacramento had been formed. Vacaville had been formed by the time this map. And by this time that it was 1862, all of this had really gone. But don't worry, because these people's next chapter won't need as much land. That's sort of a hint, but it's not quite a spoiler alert. But this is how it looked. And now you know who lived here and when. Okay, Armando, are you still here? I am now going to turn the floor over to Armando Perez, and he will talk about Semillero or Chief Solano. Thank you.
It's good to see everybody here again. Last time I had a great time, and you know how much people were really interested in the settlement in this area. Of course, I grew up around Arizona, southern Arizona, and partly in Brentwood and California, and then moved to Vacaville in 1970. I didn't realize there was so much rich history here in this area. But anyway, I'm going to talk about Semillero. And Semillero had a lot of names. He was born supposedly in Sassoon, but then again, controversial things come up that they said no, he was born in Sonoma. So we'll just say he was born here in Sassoon, which is also known as, they call that city or that village Yuyu. And now that's where they were established at, right around the Sassoon area where the Martin Ranch is at right now. That's their little village that they had. Plus they were extended up towards Benicia, where they had some extension of villagers over there to be by the Sassoon Marsh. Let's see, let me get my pictures together here. This received this information from a thesis that Marcus Peterson wrote in 1944 for his UC Berkeley, I think it was master's degree. And he did a lot of research, and there's a lot of bibliography in the back of the book that I read. So it was very, very interesting to read this stuff. And it came, most of it was written by Vallejo, General Vallejo. He loved to exaggerate things, and he loved to have everything recorded so nobody can forget him. So at the time of as a child, Sarmiento had different names. There was his name was Sino, his name was Nama, and his name was Tatoy. So as they grow older, they would change the name, just like the indigenous people of the United States. They would not even name their child until later years when they saw their type of personality they had. Then they would give them a name. As an adult, Sarmiento grew to be 6'7". But it was rumored that his dad was one of the settlers around that area. So maybe he was part Anglo. But 6'7", man, that's really big for us. Especially little guys, Apaches, we're like 5'6". The colonists around this area, when they start coming in, they describe the indigenous people as short savages, broad face, narrow nose, black hair with bangs, stupid and brutish. So a little history of how the territory came about that the Spaniards came to settle. In 1769, Gaspar de Portoles entered the San Francisco Bay. Of course, he was sent there to look for development of settlements. So immediately he went around San Francisco, Oakland, didn't go any further into the other bays, but he did go back, reported this to his superiors. In 1771, Pedro Barcos and fathers Juan Crespe entered the San Pablo Bay and came around the Suisun Bay. And that was, I think that was a jackpot for him because it was such a beautiful area for new settlers to come around. By 1810, there was a mission and procedure were established in San Francisco. So you could see it took about, what, 10 years or more to settle that area. And there they built a mission and a presidio. And then he also built a mission in San Jose. Many of the grounds were taken from the Custonians, the Yukots, the Susunis, around that areas where they lived, and this land was started to be taken over. Of course, when they take over land, they took away the hunting grounds of these people. The Custonians were around Contra Costa County, so were the Yokuts. But then the Susunis, of course, that one were all over here on this side of the bay. These people started to have to raid the missions, and they would kill the Indian slaves that were there. Mostly because, and my feeling is, why are you working here with them? You should be out in the wild with us. But a lot of the slave Indians were murdered, they were killed. A lot of the horses and cows were cut loose. But because their grounds were taken, they didn't have hunting grounds. They would eat the cows. That was their meals. You take from me, I'll take from you. We have to survive. In 1810, Gabriel Morega was ordered by the government to punish these Indians. They punished, one was punished for the attacks on the missions and for taking away all the cows and horses that they had. Moraga landed near Benicia, crossing the Cortina Straits. They landed near Benicia, Then marching past the back hills of Benicia, they encountered 120 Sioux Indians. The Siouxes were just totally defeated. Their weapons were spears, knives, and bow and arrows with an obsidian tip, and that's it. They didn't have the modern weapons that the settlers had. They were no match for the rifles, the lances, the sabers, and the men on horses. And of course, you know that most of them had never seen a horse before. So it was like, oh my God, what is this animal? In the Lakota language, they're called Tatonka. I named my dog Tonka because he's a little guy. So the Indians refused to give up. They totally refused. They're too proud. They ran into their little tule huts, dry tule huts. Moraga ordered all the tule huts to be burnt, and they did. They set fire to them, and the people in there stayed, and they died in there. When he reported back to his superiors, Moraga was promoted to a lieutenant because his superiors regarded him as a brevet, Leon Tanani, like a brave lieutenant. And he got promoted. Excellent job, good job. In 1817, Governor Jose David Arguella ordered Lieutenant Sanchez to come back and explore that region where Moraga was at first. So he sent this expedition over there, and they snuck up over there by the Montezuma Slough and a Nurse Slough that is there now. And they ventured up all the way to Vacaville. These guys didn't avoid all the encounters, and they went back to their boats, back up to the piers again, and reported about this beautiful land that could be taken. Okay, then Arguello ordered his men. After a while, he went up to his to explore the Sassoon, and he saw this beautiful. It was Fairfield, Rockville, and Vacaville. Later on, Spanish army came up, and behind the Benicia Hills, fierce fighting began. They had their chief, the chief Malika, was there for the fight. They drove the Spanish back. But when they got to the shores around Benicia, there was another army sitting there waiting. So they merged with the first group that went out towards Sassoon, and they came right up with all their rifles, sabers, lancers, weapons that they had, and made the Sunni Indians retreat back. They retreated all the way to Yulu. This lasted for 3 days, fighting back and forth. Finally, Malika called all his chiefs and told them, burn the village out, just get out of here. We're getting just killed out here. So he did. And his chiefs went around burning all the huts. And again, the indigenous people of that area refused to come out. And they burned rather than to give up to the colonists. This reminds me of Iwo Jima. When the Marines took over Iwo Jima, the Japanese people would rather jump over cliffs into the ocean than to give up to the Americans, because that's what they used to hear about the Americans, that they were bad. So you would see mothers with women and mothers with children and jumping off cliffs. Well, Malika knew. Okay, oh yeah, he knew Ezekiel, so that's exactly what he did. It was at that time that they believed that Sarmiento was captured and taken to the San Jose mission to convert him. Well, he was young at the time, 17 years old. So he did. He learned everything about the Spanish culture. He learned about the army tactics. He learned everything about the Mexicans that were there. He also learned to read and he learned how to write. So he was a very intelligent person. He was not just an Indian. He was a very intelligent Indian. In 1823, Father Altamaria was ordered to establish a mission in Sonoma, the Valley of the Moon. That's what the people call it, the indigenous people call it. The mission was named after Francisco de Solano, a Padre saint that dedicated his life to the indigenous people of Peru, where he died in 1610. So he was made a martyr. He was made a saint. That's from Spain. It is said that Sarmiento was present during the construction of the mission. The mission failed due to Indian incursions. At this time, Sarmiento was converted to the Catholic religion and was baptized. You are now Francisco Solano. And his name was never, Sarmiento was never heard again. He was known as Chief Solano. The government, in 1830, the government ordered that the mission Sonoma be rebuilt because of the interest of the Russians in Fort Ross and the friendship with Russians with John Sutter. So they decided these people are going to come down and slowly take over Northern California. We can't let them do that. So this father was ordered to establish Mission Sonoma again, failed the first time. This is where General Vallejo met Sarmiento, Chief Solano. They became friends, acquainted each other. And at the time, there weren't any really wars with the Susunis yet, or the Winton Nation. The indigenous people could no longer take the punishment, the brutality, the people made slaves, the children being sold to new settlers as servants. And they were very, very angry. They were just tired of this. The people, the Sonomas, Hulialis, Canamaras, the Zimbalekis, the Petalumas, the Wapos, the Napas, the Yulukas, the Sosco, Temas, the Susunis, Putponis, the Laras, Yularas. All these people made Chief Solano they ordered him as a chief and called him Chief Solano. He, at the time, Chief Solano decided to gather his chiefs. Every village had their own chief, but they were all under the Winton Nation. He gathered them and planned an uprising. General Vallejo heard about the uprising. He gathered 200 men armed with horses, sabers, lancers, and guns to confront and stop this uprising. The battle ensued at Sosto Valley. Hundreds of Indians surrounded Vallejo and his men. It was a horrific battle. Can you imagine these indigenous people fighting with just a knife or a lancer, and these other people had guns and horses? Vallejo, let's see. Excuse me. Vallejo, in the middle of the whole confrontation, saw that his men were getting massacred, getting wiped out. So he immediately sent for help. This one friend that came, the one army general that came was Figueroa. He responded with 600 men, all armed. The battle quickly changed and the Indians retreated with the army right behind them. Chief Solano decided it was wiser to make peace so that his people will not be slaughtered. So he put up the truce flag and met General Vallejo under this oak tree. There they discussed a peace treaty, which is the indigenous people didn't have anything written down, but they did. So they decided a peace treaty. And Alone, what he did was Alone went and met General Vallejo under this oak tree. And he was dressed like his warriors, completely naked, with a white feathered headband and their obsidian weapons. Vallejo walked up to Sarmiento walked up to General Vallejo in his war regalia, again naked, and he even left his weapons back, did not bring it with him. There, because he spoke Spanish so well, he made an alignment with General Vallejo. So at that time, they decided that Vallejo's men would not harm Chief Solano's people, as long as Solano would work with him. So they got an alliance where General Vallejo would benefit from this by having an Indian army to fight the Indians. This was necessary because a lot of the indigenous people there, they were rogue. They didn't want the missions to control their lives. They wanted the same freedom they had before. So together they had an alliance, and from there they started working together. In 1835, the Loyola Toys and the Santa Marias decided to continue fighting the Spanish. Salvador Vallejo, General Mariano's brother, led a group of men to fight these two nations. Yeto with his army of Indians, but Yeto had a personal vendetta against the chief, the Yolotoys, Chief Zampe, wanted to continue fighting to regain control of all the Indian nations that Chief Solano was now in charge of. He wanted to drive Vallejo out of Sonoma so that he could control all of this area. So that's why he went against the war, put up a war against the Spaniards. But Yeto didn't want this man to take over. He was the great chief around that area. He was the big man. So he told his soldiers, do not kill this man. Bring him back alive. So now, this war back and forth between Zempe Zempe and Solano went on for about a year, back and forth. They would just do what they wanted to do and fight. But anyway, they finally caught Zempe, and Solano took them to the mission Sonoma, where there Zempe became a good farmer. He was an excellent worker for the mission. But every time Solano would walk by him, he would remind him, I saved your life. And this is a pride thing. Like, I saved your life. I own you. Okay. Well, I got my pages all messed up. I'll blame it on my dog. In 1837, there was an epidemic, smallpox. It was acquired through Fort Ross. It was acquired and gone to Sutter. It was a big trade between them. And eventually into the villages in Northern California. And there was a total wipeout of the people. It's a new disease for the indigenous people. Just like us with COVID. In 1838, a group of Lake Indian came down to Sonoma. There were a couple of spies that went in to see the layout of the mission and in the little village, and to see the outpost of the soldiers and how many. Well, they were in the town when they were discussing what they could do. But an orphan little boy that learned the Native American language heard him. They would ignore him because he didn't look like a little Indian. He was just a Caucasian. And this little orphan boy went and reported that to General Vallejo. Of course, Vallejo sent his army out there. The Peña-Vaca decided that he would go. So during the night, they came around, found the encampment, circled all the Lake Indians, and just massacred them. And they all, just a very few, escaped. And from that, they knew they were never going to be bothered by this group of people. In 1840s, let's see, I don't want to mess up. Okay. In June 16th, 1846, a company of 33 Americans from Sutter's Fort captured the Sonoma mission. They took General Vallejo as a prisoner. He was sent to Sutter's Fort. This was the Bear Flag Revolt, the beginning of the end for Sarmiento. Now, Sarmiento heard about it, and he thought for sure that Vallejo was dead. So he left. He went up as far as Alaska, and he was gone for 10 years till 1858. There were many incidents that happened during Sarmiento's campaign with his Indian army. He was sent in Fort Ross, there was a new governor that came from Russia to govern Fort Ross. And he brought his beautiful blonde. Now, all these people living around this area up to San Francisco would hardly ever see a woman, especially a blonde, blue-eyed woman. I'll tell you what, Sam Yato and General Vallejo went to San Francisco, where they were at, on a little trip, and met them. He was infatuated with this woman. But she had her eye on Sam Yato. She would just look at this guy called, what a magnificent man, 6'7", handsome, big warrior. And she was kind of infatuated with him. So they left them alone, and the Russian group, started going up to Napa to see Mountain Helena. Is it? Yeah. So he went up there. They went up there in a little excursion. And of course, General Vallejo thought at that time that they were there to spy and again try to take control of Northern California. So he sent, of course, Sam Yato just volunteered, he was there. So Salvador Vallejo went with him. And they followed the group. They started going back to Fort Ross. So what happened was that Sam Yato went ahead of the Russian group, encircled the Russians, and made that woman his prisoner. Immediately they sent for General Vallejo, and here he comes. And he went so apologetic to this princess, or this beautiful woman. And she said, oh, no. It's such a beautiful adventure that he's doing this for me. That, oh, what a wonderful man. And she was all happy about it and giddy. That this big chief stopped the whole group to capture her and have her. So it was like a fantasy, you might say. Another time, Arguello, the governor, was in Monterey. And by this time, the indigenous people had started to like alcohol, which they didn't have. And it's like always asking me, why do you Indian guys get drunk so fast? We did not taste alcohol until you guys brought it. So the liver couldn't process all the poisons out of it fast enough. So it just stayed in the body. But anyway, the group was sent to Monterey, where the governor was at, because Governor Arguello was not getting along with General Vallejo. So General Vallejo thought, well, you know, I'm going to show him my strength. So he sent his brother Salvador and Chief Solano to Monterey and just be there for a couple of days. Vallejo wanted to show his strength of armies that he had. And this governor is not going to be telling me what to do. So the men from Sam Yato, they were excited because now they could pick up shells from the beaches. And shells were used as money. That was part of the money for exchanging. So they wanted to go there to the beach and collect all the shells as much as they could. But anyway, they went into Monterey, and right away, of course, they went and cleaned out the town by drinking all their liquor. In 2 weeks, it was all gone. So the Indians left very happy. They had their shells and they had their liquor, and that was it, just to show what had happened. My text group, okay. In November of 1842, an incident happened in Monterey. Commander Jones of the United States Navy was around the coast of South America, where he got word that the United States had declared war on Mexico, which of course it would include California. Commander Jones and these two other ships went with him up north and run around Monterey Bay. They opened fire and destroyed the city of Monterey. They came on shore. By that time, Vallejo had heard about him. So he sent out a message to get Vallejo, come visit us in Sonoma. Again, here comes Sarmiento. This commander, kind of was checking out the land, of course, and they caught him way off track from Sonoma, and he knew the route to Sonoma, but he decided to go around and check out the territory. Well, here comes Sarmiento and Salvador, and they captured this commander. Right away, they took him to the Sonoma missions and put him in jail. What a blunder. Now General Vallejo's all scared because we were captured in America, and then now he's our prisoner. Now we're going to get the United States honest about taking us. So he immediately released this man and apologized, threw a big fiesta for the guy. And then they went back to Monterey. They got on their ships. By this time, they heard that there was no war between the US and Mexico. But coming along where I was talking about General Vallejo, when he was in the Sutter jail, he had hundreds of soldiers outskirts of Sacramento. One of them came in and told him that we're ready to fight. We're going to get you out of this jail right now. But General Vallejo, smart man, he knew that it would be better for me to stay in jail, let these Americans come, and they could free me from Mexico. And I could stay in California and be an American citizen. So he told his people, no, I don't want to fight. Leave me alone. So later, that's when he was released and he went back to Sonoma. And I told you that at that time, Sarmiento had gone up north and he came back, found out that his buddy was still alive. So they became good friends again, but with the weakening of Mexico, of Spain, because in 1822, they were liberated from the French or somebody, and they became free. Then there was a lot of chaos with the government. And that's why Vallejo was thinking about, hey, I could stick around here, help them out, and I could become a US citizen. Now, if I could only find my last page. Okay. Yep. Okay. Anyway, what happened was that around 1835, General Vallejo gave Chief Solano 31,000 acres. And they had to put it through the government, which took about 5 years to do. And they had the people there, governor and everyone around him had political interest to gain land for themselves. So it took them 5 years to grant this land. But there was no paperwork for Solano. It was just like a verbal thing. Okay, you can have the land. But under the regulations that Cecilia mentioned, they had to put houses in that land. They had to grow a crop of some sort. They have to have fruit trees there. And then have to live there for, I believe, 5 years or so to gain control of this land. So what happened was that as soon as the land was approved, well, I'm sorry, I take that back. As soon as the transition was done between Vallejo and Chief Solano, not even a year later, Vallejo bought back the land for $1,000. Not all of it, but he paid $1,000 in silver to Vallejo. Now, when there was no contract drawn up or mortgage for Semiatoho, Armijo came. And he claimed to the government that he was, Vallejo was not doing his job because he had excessive land and he was not using it all. So excessive land, the government could take it back and resell it or lease it. So Armijo took over a great deal of land around Fairfield. And there he is, he left without that land. Other settlers came in and bought thousands of acres for $50. So all he had now was just a very small area around where the Martin Ranch is at. And they say he actually lived in a cave in Rockville for a while after he came back from Alaska. Okay, so I have a small part of what happened to this poor man. After he came back from the north, after he came back, he went back to his old village and got pneumonia and he passed away. His people buried him not too far away from the Martin Ranch in a tree there that was there. And there, they say, is where he was laid to rest. But the Pomo say he was buried over there. And another group said he was buried over there. So you have this controversial problem with where is this man? But anyway, he was in a situation with all these changes. I mean, oh my God, changes are. You have settlers coming in, you got the wars with villages against villages. He had settle those people down, and that was his main thing, an alignment with Vallejo to keep control of the Northern California villages. And they were very brutal, very brutal. They would, just to set an example, they would completely wipe out a village and burn it down. That was their main thing. Okay, I'm getting there. Hang in there, guys. tell you, my dog got in here and. Okay. But anyway, at the end of his life, General Vallejo wrote a very good little note saying that without this man's courageousness, a man as a chief and a man true to his nation, that these counties around Northern California were made. And this is a man who did that by helping General Vallejo keep control of all the people around our area down here. And the only thing that really bothers me is that this poor man, after he did all that, he ended up living in a cave. And to me, that doesn't seem right. Now, he could very well be hated by the indigenous people of Northern California because he turned on them and murdered them. And it was just like, this is my job and this is what I'm gonna do. I don't care if you're indigenous. I don't have you have my same blood. I'm working for Vallejo and this is what my job and that's what I'm gonna do. Which brings to something that I remembered right off the bat was that Geronimo did the same thing, but he did the opposite. He left San Carlos with 40 people because he did not want to be an enslaved Indian in a small area. They took away my weapons, you took my land, my language, and you want me to stay in this desert area. So what he did, 40 people went with him, women, children, some warriors, some bucks, and they went after him. But the problem was with that was that the government decided to punish the people in the reservations. It took away their food for a month. Then they say, didn't you guys, isn't it true that you Indians ate dog? Well, there's nothing else to eat. We have to survive. So they would slaughter their dogs, their horses, whatever they could to survive. These people, some disliked Geronimo. He was like a traitor to them. So that was the end of the story with Geronimo. And I'm proud to say that I enjoy talking to you about Samia Toho, which in my mind will always be Samia Toho. And I thank you very much for having me up here to speak. Even though I got lost in my pages, I still memorized them. So I hope you didn't get lost. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So thank you, both Cecilia and Armando, for sharing such a wealth of information. And I'd like to open up some maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes for questions first with all of you who are here in person, and then we'll see if there are any questions in the chat through Zoom. Nothing yet. Nothing yet. Okay, if any questions pop up in the chat through Zoom, we can take those afterwards. And I did not mention at the beginning, thank you to all of you who are attending through Zoom. How many do we have?
I think there was 8, I think.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. I know Sadie Reddick is one of those 8, my first grade teacher, and she's written a wonderful book, by the way, that talks a lot about 1848 and what happened just prior and just after. So it kind of coincides with this theme. And she's going to be zooming in March 15th at the museum during one of our coffee hours. So we'll send information about that. So are there any questions from anyone here in person?
Yes.
For you.
Yes.
So where do you come from?
My grandparents, my dad's side came from the Sierra Madres in Mexico, Tarhumaras. And my other grandfather, my mom's,
That's down in almost Chihuahua, isn't it?
it is in Chihuahua, yes. And my mother is Apache. So my grandfather would always say that he was an Apache. So as far as we could see, he was a Chiricahua.
My grandmother was Tarahumara.
Oh, so we were like relatives.
So,
Yeah, they migrated up to El Paso, around outskirts of El Paso. And my grandparents were just farm workers. They did whatever they could to survive. My dad left the reservation. I mean, my grandfather, my mom's dad, left the reservation in the mountains to find work because there was no food. So at 14 years old, he was down around the ranches that the Mexican had, and he became a bronco buster. That was his first job. And my mom and my dad, they both they only had a second grade education. So we lacked the skills of survival when we were small into the community, into the world, you might say. Thank you. Any more questions?
you
Anything?
currently reside here in Sonoma County?
Oh, yes, I came to Vacaville in 1970. But we came from Arizona down by the Sonoran Desert in a 1952 Chevy with all the kids were, at the time there were 8 of us. But by that time I had a stepfather that spoke Spanish and my mom, and we drove from Stanfield down by Phoenix in that old car. And we would sell everything in the car to get gas to make it up here to the valley to pick nuts and fruits. And that was my main job. I was about 10 years old when we came up here. But in Arizona, the whole family would be out picking cotton. And the cotton rows were about a mile long. And I would either bring the water to my parents, or I would make piles in front for my mama and scare away the scorpions and rattlesnakes, so she wouldn't get scared. And then she would come by and pick up that bundle of cotton we had, 25 cents a pound for cotton. Not only that, we had to take it to the end of the row and get it weighed, get paid, and climb up the ladder to the big truck trailers and dump all the cotton into the trailers there. We had a guy that would stand up there and watch, because some guys would throw dirt clods in there, you know. You just got some beer, man. So. And just to let you know that when I was on the cotton field at 6 years old, by the way, my great grandfather was a medicine man. But when I was 6, 7 years old, I was out in a hot Arizona heat in the middle of a cotton field. And I said, God, I do not want to do this all my life. I want to help the sick people. And I don't know if it's by coincidence, I worked as a respiratory care practitioner for 42 years, retired from John Muir Medical Center. And I was usually get trauma or heart surgery patients to put them on life support.
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, if not, we have refreshments for everyone. And at the back corner over here, there's more information, and then we have Cricket and Armando will be here if you have any questions and would like to speak with them one-on-one. We can stay as long as you would like. So thank you for attending today.
Thank you.
Would like to make a quick announcement. My daughter Yolanda and her husband Art came down to see me today. They're here.